Welcome to the Franchisee Show, where we hear about the stories and secrets of the franchise pros. On today's podcast, we speak with the CEO of Allies, Paul Hatch. Paul resides in sunny southern Utah and gives us lots of great advice on his past experiences. He has always had the entrepreneurial itch and has owned a few of his own businesses in the past. Paul dives deep into his experience in being the first owner of a franchise and the obstacles that came with it. Paul Hatch will explain the transition from being a franchisee to being on his own. He will also explain the importance of reestablishing a brand and the challenges that arise with it. The entrepreneurial spirit that Paul brings to the table is unmatched. I think many different people can benefit from Paul's experience in today's show. Without further ado, we welcome the CEO of Allies, Paul Hatch. Hello, and welcome to the Franchisee Show, where we hear the stories and secrets of the franchise pros. We're here today with Don Pierce, our very own franchise pro. My name is Jessica Elgin, and today we have a special guest with us. This is Paul Hatch. Paul is the owner of Allies, and he's going to talk to us today a little bit about transitioning from a franchise into a solo operation. And we're also going to talk about the due diligence from learning from his experiences that you really should take when choosing your franchise organization. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Don, let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah, I mean, let's go right to it.
Okay.
I look at your background, and you ran a very successful printing business, and then you decided to build a new business, and in the process, you decided you wanted to use franchising. What are some of the things you looked at in making that decision to become a franchisee versus starting another new business on your own?
Yeah, it was probably the idea that I wanted to start a new career, right? And I had all this experience in the printing world, and as you know, with the internet and social media and digital technology, the printing world flipped upside down. We were doing about $18 million a year in revenue. We had close to 100 employees, and we saw the writing on the wall, and we did keep growing through acquisitions of smaller printing companies and tucking them into our organization. But my dad and I wanted to get out, and we found another company, and we sold our business. Well, I had an employment agreement with the new owners, and yeah, I had a good job, but I was no longer, the president of the company and calling the shots, and it was just a different experience. And so I've always been entrepreneurial minded, right? But I really needed a change in my life and a career change. And I wanted to start another business, but didn't want it to be anything related to what my experience was at that time. So what made sense to me is finding a franchise business, so I didn't have to reinvent the wheel, and I could learn, from them what is needed to branch out and have a new career. Another goal of mine at the time was to move to beautiful, sunny St. George, Utah, which people don't know where that is. It's year-round golf, some of the best weather you could ever imagine. It's similar to Las Vegas, but as far as weather goes. But I wanted to live here and raise my family here, but didn't know how to make a living here. And I was really passionate as a member of a group called Corporate Alliance. I was involved in this. It's a networking group for business owners, and really enjoyed what they did. And this company really was thriving in Utah County and Salt Lake County in northern Utah. And they had the idea, kind of like the pizza guy, right, that had a great pizza sauce, and one day decided, hey, you should franchise this. Yeah. And that was kind of what they were in that scenario where, hey, we have an amazing concept and a way of doing retreats and a way of bringing business owners together and learning from one another and collaborating and sharing best practices. And, there's all these values in relationship building, and I love that too. And so it was a combination of me getting excited about starting a new life in St. George, a new career, and this business that I was involved in as a member of, and them announcing that they were going to franchise it. I actually decided to be the first guinea pig, so to speak, and the first franchisee franchise business for Corporate Alliance. And so it was a fun venture. I started it over 8 years ago in Southern Utah. Now we have close to 500 members, over 300 businesses involved. And it's been a great venture. But I did learn a lot of things along the way that I would love to give advice to anyone that is looking at maybe getting involved in a franchise business or doing some due diligence at this point to consider, what would be the right fit. So,
yeah, I think that's excellent. There's a lot of our listeners that are going to be at the same life position that you were, have had a good career, want to do something different, and feel like franchising might be a way to get into that new career. Based on your experience now, what are some of the steps of due diligence that you would say everyone should go through?
The biggest mistake that I made looking back was I had a great relationship with the founder of the company. And we kind of had this idea that he was always going to be involved and we were always going to have this goodwill between us. And little did I know or forecast that several years into this, he would sell out and no longer be involved. And now I'm dealing with another franchisor that I don't really even have that relationship with, not to the same degree. And one of the main problems and mistakes that I made is I thought I'd save a few dollars by not paying a lot to an attorney to review my franchise agreements, etc. I went through them, and again, I trusted who I was doing this with, and going back when I started having some friction in some situations, I really wish that I would have had an attorney give me advice on what was in that franchise agreement, because it was so one-sided, it was ridiculous. It had all these requirements of things that I needed to do and was responsible to do, but really couldn't put my finger on anything that they were responsible for.
Yeah.
And looking back, that's one of the biggest things that I would encourage anyone. Spend the money on a good attorney and give you the advice that you need. You're only going to do this once or twice in your life. Make sure the documents are in your favor as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I know in the businesses I was with, I always looked at as a franchisor, we had 2 or 3 main areas of responsibility, and you've touched on one of them there. One clearly is there's value to our brand, and we need to make that brand available to our franchisees and find ways to continue to keep the brand in a good position. But the other is it's an operating business, and that we have an infrastructure, a support infrastructure, and the detail available to provide all the operating tools that a franchisee would need. And then the third area is we have an accountability to keep those up to date. So you're right. A good attorney would help you look at that and say, oh, okay, these are 3 categories. And boy, this agreement doesn't apply there, because that's a big part of the business for you.
Is it really?
Yeah, I learned that several years into it and realized my situation, because I wasn't too many years into it where I realized my business was probably worth more outside of the franchise agreement than in it.
Yep.
And I started trying to negotiate getting out of my franchise, and they wanted a big check, bigger than I was willing to pay at the time. And so I stuck with the franchise, even though I wasn't happy. But this gap continues to grow, where you're paying more and more in royalties and feel like you're getting less and less in value. Yeah. And that's a typical problem, I believe, in with the franchisor relationship, and it's not healthy, obviously. And I know my franchisors meant well; they're good people. They had a great concept, kind of like the company that invented a great pizza sauce or whatever.
Right.
But you go into a franchise because you have a zone of genius. You have certain things that you're really good at. Knowing that, a good franchise business, I don't have to be the expert at everything is what you hope, right? That, you go into a small business, if you're starting a company, you got to be the CMO, you got to be the CFO, you got to be the CEO. And, unless you're the right entrepreneur, it's really hard to wear all those hats. And every small business struggles with that. And so what's nice about a real franchise business, one that's seasoned and dialed in, is they have the ops figured out and the procedures and training for hiring and recruiting your employees and training them. And you would think that they would have those things anyway. And, marketing and marketing support and help, which is a huge one. I was in a very early franchise business that they had a really cool concept and did pretty well in their market. And then soon into this, I realized I had the burden of a royalty, but I still had the same burden of any startup company, where I had to figure out my own operations and my own marketing and my own HR and training. And so those are things, obviously, you want to take a serious look at. Otherwise, really, all you've got is a licensing agreement. And in reality, that's probably all I should have had, is some sort of licensing agreement. But the name and the brand that I had really only had value because I established that name and brand in my market. Like, people didn't know it. It wasn't well known. And, it's not like an Arby's or McDonald's or something. So,
yeah, anyway. My takeaway from that, and one of my takeaways from that is, for a potential franchisee, understanding the maturity or the place in the life cycle of the franchisor really puts some different things on the due diligence. So you say McDonald's or somebody like that, it's pretty easy to reach out to existing franchisees, talk to them, get a good picture of how the relationship has been and what they offer. But if you're going to be a franchisee of a newer business, it says on the due diligence end, hey, I may need to spend more time and money up front, making sure I button up my agreement well, make sure it's good on my end as well. I mean, let's face it, you say the person who started the business, you had a good relationship with. People turn over in businesses. And so the person you're dealing with, even in McDonald's, is not going to be there maybe in 5 years. But you've got a track record there. If the track record is short, potential franchisee ought to say, probably worth more in money and time to do a more deep due diligence and make sure my agreement's right. I mean, that's my takeaway from what I hear. And that, that's a good lesson that you've learned, and you're helping a lot of other people learn that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Paul. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, I was really excited about what they were doing, and I saw that it was in my zone of genius, where I loved working with business owners, and I love putting on events and retreats, and that just something that I got really excited about. So I was so excited about the business that I didn't really spend a lot of time on the details and the contract. And again, I didn't hire the experts that I should have. And so that would be my next piece of advice. No matter how excited you are about the particular opportunity, don't overlook those details.
Yeah. Right. Don't get too excited for the deal.
So I'm curious, we've talked a lot about when you're first going in and hiring the attorney and looking at the details, right? Once you're in there, my curiosity is this. I think a lot of our listeners out there are in a very similar situation. They get in with a franchise. It's great. It sets them up. They get what they need in the beginning, and then they become disenchanted because the services start lacking. So a lot of them are also considering leaving the franchise. There's a lot involved, and you even mentioned it's taken you several years to make that transition. What are some of the steps that they're going to have to go through to get to that point? And after figuring out what those steps are, what kind of advice do you have for them?
Yeah, it's each situation's different. If you really are trying to get out of your franchise, I mean, I've been trying for 5 years. So it's not like this is something you could wake up one morning and say, I want out of my franchise and I'm going to just get out. It takes a long time. And, we went through lots of different phases where communication was actually, because I was sort of disgruntled and not happy with, what was happening, I would just focus on my business and run my business. And then, of course, we'd just pay royalties reluctantly. And there would be zero communication to the fact that I didn't even know different updates or things that they were doing. And it was really unhealthy from both sides. And I was as much responsible as they were, but we went long periods of time without having very good communication at all. And so that's really the key, is the communication, whether you want in or out of your agreement. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. Even though I wasn't getting value, I wasn't spending a lot of time being squeaky either,
Right.
and demanding things. And so, to be fair to them, they've had great intentions, and probably anytime I was squeaky, they would try to step up to the plate and provide some sort of value. But when it came right down to it, I just knew that I wanted to be independent and needed to negotiate something there. And of course, if you're negotiating something, unless you're going to go into some legal battle, which there's plenty of attorneys that make a good living on that.
Right.
You can go down that path, or I chose not to do that either. I chose to find the right opportunity to where I can offer something that's a win-win, and work it out to get out of it. And originally they wanted 3 times what I was able to get, and eventually, with enough communication and open communication, when you're being authentic and genuine and vulnerable and sharing what you're really needing, where I made it very clear to them I needed out of this franchise box. I needed to break out of my geographical location. I'm too much of an entrepreneur and a maverick. I need to do some other things. Once they really believed that and understood that, we found a win-win.
Yeah, and I from being in the franchisor seat for a lot of years, I'll echo that. I think early and honest communication is really important. I can tell you, I've had disgruntled franchisees.
Absolutely.
They were unhappy. But the sooner we started that dialogue and did it in a business-like manner, we worked most of them out. And so I think you're right. If you don't do that up front, it kind of gets out of hand, out of everybody's chance. Pride gets on the line, all those kinds of things. So the earlier you communicate things, you do it in a business-like manner, the more likely that you're going to be able to work it out, and you'll both be happier either side of it. I'm glad that you got that communication going. And as you say, Jessica, I suspect there's a number of franchisees out there that will say, hey, this isn't working out the way I thought it would. Boy, start that communication with the franchisor. Maybe they can fix something. And if not, you can start to work down a good road.
And I think that's the key right there. When you open that communication, you give them the opportunity as the franchisor to fix it. Because I don't think any franchisor comes into it thinking, oh, I want to just let my franchisees hate me. I don't want them to like me. I don't want to help them. I just want to take their money. I don't think that's why they get into it.
No. And it's bad for their business. Frankly, I'm sure they would have loved if they had a great relationship with you and you grew the businesses like you did, to have other potential franchisees say, hey, call Paul Hatch.
Yeah.
He can tell you what a good business this is. And they lost that opportunity with you.
Yeah. That's interesting. So you've had quite a bit of change. And I know you had a period of time, a couple of months, where you had to do a quick changeover between logos and all of that type of stuff. What was the best thing that came out of that brief period of time? And what was the hardest thing? I don't want to say the worst, but the hardest thing to go through during the transition?
That's a good question. There's a lot of changes. It's really like you create a brand. I've been in business for 8 years. I created a brand and a brand awareness in this community with the Corporate Alliance name. Now, out of nowhere, there's a lot of people that are still confused and saying, Allies, what happened to Corporate Alliance? Yeah. Oh, it's just a brand change, right? And so that's a very difficult thing. And I don't care what the name is. I like the name Allies better, but the fact is we're starting over with the brand recognition and explanation. And even though we have a great upside and story to tell, where we have more resources, more tools, more events, more retreats, it's still a process where I got to talk to each member and each past member and each prospect. And that takes time. And so you do take a step backwards when you leave the brand that's been established and you have to go with a new name or brand.
That is interesting. That's
a,
well,
you know,
and you've seen some big transitions.
Oh, sure. I mean, every retail brand, that's always an issue. And,
Yeah.
even for a lot of chains or groups that acquire other businesses, they'll have to ask the question, do we change the name of the brand we bought or not? Because it's very hard in the consumer's mind to change what they think and the goodwill that has been bought with the consumer.
So Don, for Paul and for our listeners out there that are in the process of a change and really getting that, you went through a big one with Arby's, where you took their, where they were standing and took them from here to here, in my opinion, wherever you want to do it, but you really had to do a lot of goodwill or how people feel about it. What kind of advice can you give them?
Yeah,
because it's emotional. It's hard when you're in it, in the trenches. Like, how do you get through that?
Yeah, it's very tough. But you've got to, I think what you've got to do is really believe that where you're going to be is a much better place to end up, that it's worth the trip to get there. Yeah. The second thing is to figure out how to explain to the consumers, your customers, what the value is going to be for them at the end of the road. Right. Why is this a good thing? Why are we changing? Whether it's something as simple as, well, you used to always buy a sandwich at Arby's with a coupon, and if you didn't have a coupon, you felt foolish going in, right? Right. To the other side is, you go there now because the quantity, quality, variety of great sandwiches is what you really want to do. It's a process.
Which is very similar to what Allies is going through, where they came for just a little bit, and now the benefits of Allies is so much greater than what it was with just Corporate Alliance, and it's getting that out there.
To me, that's the big thing about a major change is you have to have a view at the end. What is the real value, and be willing to communicate that all the time. When people talk about why is Allied more, Allied's better than Corporate Alliance because this is what you're going to get. You've got to have that in your mind because they're going to have to hear that all the time.
Absolutely.
Do you think there was a lot of advertising or marketing that had to be pushed, and do you think that's necessary with every transition?
I think communication is important with every transition. The tactics you use are different depending on the situation. If you're a retail brand like a food business, then it's probably advertising. In your business, Paul, it may be more one-on-one communication to people.
Yeah, it's word of mouth. Absolutely.
Getting that relationship. Well, that's great.
But so far things have gone better than expected. There's a lot of things you got to pick up on, and again, probably one of the biggest reasons for deciding to do a franchise or deciding to break away from one is, what is your zone of genius? Where do you bring the most value to your company, and how are you going to spend more time there? Because if you're the technician, like E-Myth talks about, right, you're the good plumber, you want to be self-employed and you're content with that, go start a company, do it on your own. If you really are more of, hey, I want the business to make me money when I'm sleeping, and you want to be the entrepreneur, this whole prototype franchise system is an amazing way to go. But you do need to do your due diligence. You need to know where is your zone of genius, and then what is missing, so that if I'm not a good CMO, chief marketing officer, I've got resources and a team that can help me figure that component out and hit that out of the park so that I don't have to worry about it. Again, that's what I was hoping I was going to get, and it was kind of goodwill. It wasn't there. And I realized, well, I'm already on my own anyway. I got to figure this stuff out anyway.
Absolutely.
Let's figure out how to get out of this royalty that I signed myself on.
Yeah. Well, I think, that's a great summary of the lessons you've learned, right? Excellent.
It is. Yeah. And I want to thank you. We're running short on time here, but I really want to thank you, Paul. You've been an excellent guest. I think you've helped us a lot, not just from kind of going through the entire process, getting into it and what you use to define and determine as a good franchise, what you do while you're in it, and the things that might come about, and some advice as you're going through that, and then how to transition out of it and transition into your new one. So I think we've kind of hit the whole gamut of it. Really appreciate having you on here. For our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. If you like what you've heard today and would like to learn some more, get some more advice on what you're doing in your situation, please listen to some of our other podcasts. And we want to thank everyone for being here on the Franchisee Show.
Great. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for joining us today. For more episodes, go to thefranchiseeshow.com.